I'm very well, Alex, thank you.
This is lovely because the thing is, interviewing another interviewer is never easy because I'm worried you're going to judge me.
Well, it's okay so far. No. I think that interviewing interviewers is actually easy because they're actually a very sympathetic audience. So they know what you're going through, and so they try very hard to accommodate you.
Well, thank you for being so giving. I appreciate that very much. The last time I saw you was on Paul O'Grady just a couple of weeks ago, and it was interesting because you were sat next to Russell Brand, and it seemed a little uncomfortable at times. You don't like nonsense, do you? And especially rudeness.
No, I don't like that at all, and I think I would have done quite a different interview with Mr. Brand had I been in the chair, but I wasn't. So we let that pass. I made my point to him that I thought he'd been daft in his behaviour, to say the least. And it was interesting that it seemed to embarrass the studio. The one had raised this subject, and Paul started poking the fire or something like that, something extraordinary. But I mean, I don't see the point of Russell Brand, quite frankly.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because you left your show because there was nobody really fit enough to interview anymore because they're so PR savvy.
That's not true. No, that's not true at all. No, I left the show because it was time to leave the show. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you look around the landscape now, that there is no conversational talk show on television, BBC or ITV. Not one. This is a late night talk show I'm talking about, not an afternoon program. So it was time to go, and since I've gone, I've been very happy because the fact of the matter is that depart before they actually tell you to go, and I chose my moment in time very carefully. The fact is they don't want that kind of show anymore. Now that's up to them, but I didn't see any reason to sit there and not be wanted. Get out in my own time. I'd done a big enough stint. I'd had some wonderful times, no regrets whatsoever. But I mean, it wasn't because the actual business itself of doing a talk show had changed. The nature of celebrities changed, and that's a different subject which we might talk about. Let's say Cheryl Cole. I know, is she a bigger star as Ingrid Bergman or Lauren Bacall? Has she had as interesting a life? If you would take out the sexual element, being married to a mad footballer. I mean, I don't want to get into those kind of areas. I don't think those people have got that kind of stature that the people that I had on my show. So it's not a question of anything other than, the actual nature of celebrity itself has become a bit more shallow, but there are still people around there in the business who are big stars. I mean, Clint Eastwood would you can go forever, and they're there to be interviewed.
You make a good point about the Russell Brand thing. I mean, it would be interesting to see you interview him, and I'd love that because I saw Jeremy Paxman try, and it became nice and funny. Paul O'Grady made it nice and funny, but of course the thing that made him most famous in this country wasn't nice or funny. You would have gone about it in a different way, wouldn't you?
Well, I would only have asked him, or any journalist would ask him, why on earth did he think, by what stretch of the imagination did he think that to ring up an old man like that, or indeed anybody, and just boast and sing about having had intercourse with his granddaughter was funny? I mean, I don't think it's funny. I really don't. And I think that the other thing too that was remarkable about that was it passed through 7 filters or so at the BBC, and yet managed to squeak out. I mean, I know producers I work for the BBC that if I'd even put that forward as an idea in a production meeting, I would never work for them again. So, I mean, it tells you as much about the way that television is produced, or radio is produced nowadays, as anything else.
Does it sadden you that we don't have a proper chat show? I suppose the only one coming near now is Piers Morgan, who's trying his best, isn't he? Does that fit more with your style?
Well, the Piers Morgan is a one-man show. Piers Morgan's show, and Piers is a deft interviewer. But the Piers Morgan show is not a talk show. The Piers Morgan show is a one-man interview show. It's a hybrid. It's a mix between a one-man interview and This Is Your Life. I mean, once you break away from the studio and bring in other elements like film and other people talking about them, that's not an interview anymore. I mean, that's something else. That's something more complex. Nor is doing a one-man show just straight, nor is that the interview program. It's part of a talk show, but the talk show is that 2 or 3 guests, the interrelation, the conversational thing. That's my view of the talk show, the traditional one. That's what's missing at present.
I've watched you over the years and tried to learn because, in my opinion, you're the master. And the most difficult point of any interview is getting started, isn't it? Because once you've got the warmth, you can carry on. What is your greatest bit of advice in making people feel comfortable around you?
Well, I think there are two things actually, Alex. One is that they must be assured when they come downstairs that they're in safe hands, in the sense that the person opposite them has read about them, has thought carefully about the interview, and is not going to ask any daft questions. I mean, you must do your homework as an interviewer. You must have that feeling of confidence that you know a lot about this person. The second thing is to do with just that business of overcoming the natural uncomfortable feeling that there is when you walk downstairs, a big band playing, with all the arc lights shining at you, with a microphone in every orifice, and they're just told at the top of the stairs to enjoy yourself. Are you mad? So what your job is as the host is to actually assure them that, this is but it's not as, in a minute, you'll just be talking to me, and just you and I in the world, and all that sort of thing goes on. I don't know how you do it, but I do know what it's like. It's a bit like, I would say it's a bit like tuning up the orchestra. And the orchestra tunes up before it plays. That's my job as the interviewer, to actually make sure they're properly tuned, the guest opposite, before we start the interview proper.
When I read the list of names that you loved the most in Parky's People, this new book, they're all big personalities and generally interesting. Can you make a boring guest interesting?
No, I don't think you can make it boring. I think it's a very good question, actually. It's a very good question. I think you can. I think you can by choosing interesting questions, so that even if the replies are ordinary, the question intrigue the person at home. I think I've done one or two of them, actually. I wouldn't like to name who they are, but I think that's right. I mean, most people don't set out to be boring. I mean, most people are boring in my experience, not on paper. But if they are boring in reality, it's because they're nervous, or because they have that kind of stage fright moment where they forget the story or whatever, or forget the prompt in your question. Good, interesting question. I have to think about that. I might do a new book, actually. The most boring people and the most interesting questions.
I would really enjoy the commission from that.
You could look forward to it, as it was your idea. Absolutely. I mean, you've had Meg Ryan on your show, have you? I mean, you know of which we speak.
She was offered, but I said no.
You're a very wise man. I mean, that was exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The point you make there is the important one, that an interview is consensual, and if either party or both decide not to give their consent, I mean, I looked at Meg and didn't like her. She looked at me and hated me, and that was the end of it. It's as simple as that. Because if you don't have that consensual element, then and you don't have to fall in love with somebody. It's just that you have to agree to actually open up to them, or you allow them to question you, and then it works. But otherwise, it doesn't. There's nothing you can do.
Do you remember the year when you had the Oprah Factor, that people were excited to talk to you opposed to it being a chore?
Well, I think we always had the kind of reputation, in a sense, particularly with the American guests, that it was the talk show to do. So we never had any problem of being the first port of call, if you like, by particularly American superstars who were coming over. We were the one program that had the name that they recognised and wanted to do. So from that point of view, we were very, very lucky.
And as for your style, your warmth, and the way you sat and the way you deliver your questions, was all that accident, or did somebody say to you one day, touch their leg, look them in the eye, sit closely, and all that stuff?
I didn't need any prompting to touch certain legs, I'll tell you. No, I actually, basically, I think it's an interesting question. I think what it is, it's that certainly the days when I trained as a journalist, and in those days you didn't sit in front of your computer and just on the phone. You had to go out and do legwork, and you had to go into pubs. And once you've gone into a couple of pubs, let's say there's a murder somewhere, nasty murder in a village somewhere in Yorkshire, and the only first port of call was always the pub, and you go in there, and there might be a bit of hostility from the locals. They didn't want you in there. But you had to get your story. I think once you've done that, once you've understood how to relate to people, not necessarily stars, just anybody, how you learn to persuade them to accommodate you at a time when they don't want to, I think then you find the rest of it fairly easy, actually. And I think that basic training you kind of soak in through your pause, and I think it comes out automatically. I mean, several people have asked me about this, and I can't give you a clear answer, except to say I think you just absorb it as you go through life as a hack.
For me, there was two different type of Parky interviews. There were the ones where you didn't do very much, and I loved them, i.e. the Lily Savage and the Dame Ednas, people like that. And then there's the Tony Blair types where you've actually got to work hard. For you, was it a joy when you knew that Joan Rivers could just sit there and carry the whole thing herself?
But what's interesting is, again, it's a good question because, what you've spotted is the difference. But at the same time, both are equally not difficult. But to be the second banana to a comic, to be Ernie Weiss to Eric Morecambe, and that's what you are. You're not an interviewer, you're that. You must understand that. If you understand that, then that's fine. So it's a question of actually not treading on their jokes. It's a question of working with their timing. It's a question of having done the research and knowing that if you say to this man, if you say to Dame Edna, how's Norm? You know you're going to get a 10-minute section about his prostate problems, you see. So it's that thing. It's playing to their strengths all the time. And I watch so many interviewers actually jump in on guys' jokes and tread on their punchline. A joke's a very delicate thing. A comedy performance is incredibly delicate. And you've got to be very careful where you plant your big feet. And I used to love doing that. I used to love working with comics because it was a different thing altogether. The testing ones, of course, yes, were the ones where you had to actually, try to actually have worked out the interview in your mind beforehand, as with somebody like Blair, ask all the important questions, predict the answers. Even then, of course, you don't know what you're getting because Blair said something which was not in research at all. When I asked him a question about the war, he suddenly said, well, we pray. And then I said, well, you prayed before you went to war? Yes, I did. And you pray to God about what? You have to keep your eyes open that for that kind of reply, which isn't in research, but you have to sort of go with. So it's a much more exhausting process than working with Billy Connolly.
Well, indeed, and you've kind of summed it up there. Really, your greatest skill is listening, not talking. Really, because anybody can ask a question, but it's whether you can follow them up.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I think you've got to actually listen. I mean, you've got to, the two key things are research and listen. I mean, you're like when you go on the advanced driving course. They say you've got two cars in front of you. Look in that shop window, and you can see the third up there in the shop window, the reflection of a car that's just crashed. That's advanced motoring in a sense. And it's like exactly doing an interview. You try to work 3 questions ahead. And it's a strange intellectual process, actually, but it's great fun. Listen, I've had the best of times for 50 years or so I should complain.
Forgive me, I drifted off a bit then, Parky. How often did that happen with you when you looked in people's eyes and it went quiet and you thought, who am I talking to and what did they just say?
I once forgot. For God, can you believe it? I forgot John Wayne's name, for Christ's sake. and I had written on my crib sheet, I had written on it Duke. As a guide, and I suddenly thought, well, it's not Duke Ellington, I know that for sure. But then I suddenly, he caught on my confusion and said, and then the guy said to me, hey, John Wayne, and looked at me, Yes, I've done that. Of course, we all do that. The mind goes totally blank. Where am I? Who am I? Who's this person opposite me? Absolutely.
Very finally, let's talk about your life in Yorkshire and your upbringing. What was it like, and were you always curious?
I think I maybe was always curious. I've always had the ability to get on with people, I think. But then my mum and dad were like that. My father's the most gregarious man I've ever met in my life. He'd come out of a toilet in a working man's tunnel and said, there's a bloke in there knows you. And I said, how do you mean a bloke in there knows me? So he just said to me, I said, no, come on, Dad, what do you say? He said, well, I said to him, does I know Mike Parkinson? And he said, yes. I said, well, I'm his dad. I said, well, I mean, these conversations have been toilets, but my father and my mother were great people, and I was the working class. My dad was a miner at Granthorpe Colliery. I wouldn't swap my childhood for anything. I was safe. I never felt unloved, never felt insecure. We were poor by any standards, But there was a great warmth about pit villages in those days, and I was not delighted. I was honoured in a sense, privileged to actually be brought up like that. Because when you look around nowadays at similar kind of working class environments, not bound together by that common cause of being a miner in a dirty, dangerous job, they leave a lot to be desired. And I was very lucky. I was blessed. This
interview's been a total waste of time. I'd written 500 questions and not got to any of them, so I don't know why we bothered turning up today, to be honest. Let me do some business for you then. We got Parky's People, the new book out. And can we do this again, by the way, properly? Because we've not got anywhere with this so far. You're too interesting. That's your trouble. The Michael Parkinson collection is going to be released on DVD on the 22nd of November. Really looking forward to that. All your best bits. The book's out now. Michael, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate your time.
Alex, thank you so much. Thank you. I enjoyed it.